That's okay. It's all right. And we're up now. And I'm going to give an intro in two, three. Oh, no. Oh, just one moment. Yusuf, I'm about to go on the air. What's going on, hon? Is everything all right? Okay, I will do that. Okay, hon. Bye bye. Okay. All right.
Okay, is my sound
Okay.
okay?
Your sound is great.
Good.
And we're up. One, two, three. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you on another hot, steamy August day. I hope that you are staying cool. Sending you so much love today. We've got a lot to talk about as we talk about what's happening in the Middle East, the Greater Israel Project. Now we have the news uh, that Mr. Netanyahu wants to remove the Palestinians. Well, he's always wanted to do that, but now it's official. And what about that? How do you have Palestine without Palestinians? And what is the Greater Israel Project? Because it really doesn't stop in the West Bank and in Gaza. It extends to Syria, it extends to Egypt, extends to other countries. How is that going to work? And what is this anyway? And I want us to look at this theologically as well as politically, because we keep hearing about the theological moorings of this project, but we need to really do a lot of fact checking. So I want you all to like and share. And hey, Bernadette, like and share. That's right, listen to her. Please like and share. I am on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social, santitajackson.bsky.social, and I am on Facebook. And that is Santita Jackson and Friends. It's the only place where I can accept new friends. So please become my friend there. And X at Santita J, at Santita J. And of course, you're watching on YouTube. YouTube. And you know, it's a joy to have this gentleman with me. He's one of my father's colleagues in the clergy. Indeed, he has been one of the most prominent, indeed, a preeminent Presbyterian minister for many, many years. Of course, we would visit the First Presbyterian Church of Evanston, one of the most prominent congregations in the United States. And he's had a tremendous journey from Christian Zionism to becoming a progressive warrior, if you will. And I encourage you to get his two of his books, Anxious for Armageddon. Hmm. I just wrapped it up last night, and I have to tell you, it is a fascinating read. And then Glory to God in the Lowest Journeys, huh, in an Unholy Land. Wow. Wow. Welcome to the show, Reverend Dr. Wagner. My father sends his love and regards to you.
Oh, that's a real blessing. Thank you.
Thank you
Grateful
so
to be
much.
with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak, because this is such a contentious topic whenever you are talking about land, which is really the only source of wealth in this world. Um, but it's your ancient landmark that the Bible tells us about, which we've been instructed by our forebears never to remove, and yet we're removing people from theirs. And as my father said, the Bible is not a real estate book. And yet, that is exactly what we're seeing. At least a version of the Bible is being used in that way. Help me to understand, what is the Greater Israel Project? When you hear Prime Minister Netanyahu say that we are going to remove the Palestinians, we are officially going to occupy Palestine, what goes through your mind?
Well, it's kind of frightening, and it makes me just terribly upset, even angry, because I know there's a lot of misguided theology, misunderstanding of the Bible, and politics behind it. And of course, I'm upset that my country, the United States, is underwriting a genocide in our time, a Holocaust, providing about 80% of the military weaponry to Israel. So this is an abomination. Um, I think the Greater Israel Project, you can go back to the Likud movement in uh, 1917, 1918, and look at their maps. And their Greater Israel Project of that Zionist movement early on included about half of South Lebanon, a significant portion of Syria and Iraq. And for many, it even goes down to the Nile River in Egypt, the Sinai. So this is the Greater Israel Project. And uh, Netanyahu right now and Israel are at war and have been bombing South Lebanon and Syria and even portions of Iraq. And of course, they're at war with Iran and Yemen. So there's 4 wars Israel is involved in right now, and then add a genocide with the Palestinians. Now they're saying they're going to drive the Palestinians from Gaza. That's about 2.2 million people who have been moved back and forth for almost 2 years, being bombed, sheltered. They've killed a record number of journalists, Palestinians and others. And now they're going to move them again, cram them into a very small area in the south. And remember, it's about 90 degrees and humid there, like Chicago or worse. And then they're talking about expelling them into 3 Arab countries. One of them is Sudan, and there's a genocide going on in Sudan that's forgotten. And they're negotiating Somalia as another place. 2 failed countries, and even discussed Libya, which is a divided country in a civil war. So the Palestinians, this is their own country. They were there first in terms of modern times, and they have a right not only to return, but a right to live on their land. And just as the Jews have a right to return and make Aliyah, so do the Palestinians, according to the UN. So anyone who has left because of the genocide, and many have gone to Egypt for treatment, they have a right to come back. So we are violating international law, and international law is now at risk. If Israel and the U.S. are successful in this genocide, international law and what has been the guardrail since the Holocaust is now up in the air and useless. So this is a moral crisis. If you want, I can even go on and talk about the theological components of this.
I wish you would, because that appears to be the linchpin. That's what makes so many people emotional. It has moved a significant portion of the American Christian church in that direction. And certainly, as someone who had been a Christian Zionist, I think that you can speak to that in a very specific way. If you would speak to that.
Yeah, I grew up with a sense that Israel was a God endowed country with a right to all of that land, and that in the latter days before Jesus' return, Israel would rise in great power, and there would be a final battle of Armageddon, and Christ would come back and defeat the Antichrist, and there would then be a new kingdom of Israel, and Jesus would reign from Jerusalem. I now believe that is a complete myth, a misreading of scripture, and I'll tell you a few reasons why. Um, John Hagee, who's a leader of the major Christian Zionist movement, Christians United for Israel, often says, if we begin to criticize Israel, God's going to punish us as a nation. Because in Genesis 12, it tells us, Genesis 12, 1, 2, 3, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. Now, he claims that's the modern day of Israel. That's flawed right there. There are 4 uses of Israel in the Bible. there was in Israel. There was a short-lived kingdom under Saul, David, Solomon, and then it was defeated in 722 when Assyria took them into captivity, and then that country disappeared. Israel is also the name of Isaac, the prophet, when he was transformed. So there's four uses, and there's a new Israel, which is the church. None of those ideas or concepts of Israel is a modern Zionist state, a state that was founded in secular terms. So that's a misnomer right there. Israel in the Bible is not the present state of Israel. It is a Zionist state, just like any other country, and needs to be evaluated and judged on the same basis. Now, when you look at that covenant, most of the Christian Zionists miss these points. A covenant is an agreement between God and the people. God is the initiator. God creates the covenant. It's an act of grace and God's love. In a covenant, there are also responsibilities. The Israelites, the early Israelites, and in the Bible, all Jews, and we are told we must abide by the Torah, the Ten Commandments, the law. That means thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, take land, for example, killing people. Today, the modern state of Israel is violating multiple commandments, and I believe there's a judgment. In the Bible, in Leviticus 18 and 19, it tells us the land will be lost if you violate the covenant. There's a graphic verse, you can look it up, that says the land itself will vomit you out if you violate the law. And that, in fact, happened. Israel lost the land on two occasions. And the point of that is land can become an idolatry. It is an idol for the present day of Zionism in Israel. And the state can become an idol. When that happens, it inverts the covenant and you have fallen away. So you can lose the land to learn a lesson. God will always be faithful, but the land is really secondary. And when you create an idol out of it, kill people, drive them out, you are to care for the sojourner in your midst, the Bible tells them. They are violating all of that. So for this to be restored, there has to be kind of an honoring of the covenant, no idolatry, and putting God first in God's law. And the Hebrew prophets and Jesus constantly called them to that. Yeah, Jesus said the prophet has nowhere to lay his head. Land was not a priority for him. What was the priority was to put God first, to honor God, serve the poor and the marginalized.
So
And
what?
Matthew 25, I think, is the key. Where were you when I was hungry? Did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? Now Israel is starving an entire population. So there's a complete violation. So all this has to be restored. And thankfully, many Jews are now calling Israel to that.
But when you speak of idolatry and the land, and idolatry and this idea of Israel, not the ideal of it, but the idea, right?
Yeah.
What do you mean by idolatry? Because I don't think that people connect idolatry to this pursuit
Yeah.
of this land, this expansion that continues to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah. So Zionism is at the heart of the problem. And Zionism is a political ideology that has now taken over Israel. And there's many forms of Zionism. Some are very humanitarian, but that has kind of been eclipsed with the maximalist iron wall type of Zionism that Netanyahu represents, where he basically has a belief that God gave this to us, only the Jewish people. And now there's a militant settler group, which is in his government, and two members of it, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, are driving Netanyahu, not that he needs to be pushed that hard, but to drive the Palestinians out. They have campaigned literally on the Palestinians must be removed, not just from Gaza, that's first, but also from East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and that's underway. And then they have this expansionist view that the greater Israel, as we said earlier, includes parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria, part of Iraq, Sinai, part of Egypt. And that is what Netanyahu's ideology, his vision is. That, I would say, is an idolatry of land that we will take from other people, inflict tremendous pain, suffering, and death, even starve a whole people so we can have our land. That then is not honoring God, not honoring Torah and the law. That I would say is an idolatry. So idols can not necessarily need to be a golden calf. It's whatever you put ahead of God.
Whatever you put ahead of God. We're talking with Reverend Dr. Don Wagner, one of the foremost clergies of our clergymen of our time, we're talking about the Great Israel Project. We're really talking about the moorings of this issue that we're dealing with in the Middle East today. Uh, I think that's probably why the founding fathers separated church and state, because you see the perfect conflation of that here.
Yeah.
And we see that with the Vatican also, but that's another story. But here, I guess you see it to go to a rather tragic end. And we're seeing the Bible is being used. And there are different versions of the Bible, Reverend Dr. Wagner. And many people, particularly at this time, are pointing to the Schofield Bible, that version, as being the foundation for
Yeah.
Zionism and Christianity. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I grew up in the Schofield Bible. And in studying what happened there was a movement that actually was rising in England under a teacher named John Nelson Darby, who had this belief that all of the Bible points to an ultimate battle of Armageddon between the forces of good and evil. And Israel was at the heart of all of that. So, what Schofield and others, Darby, did was they created kind of an outline of that narrative. That's a particular narrative that kind of skews how you read the Bible. So, if you open your Schofield Bible, the verses I referred to in Genesis 12, then Genesis 15, the covenant, they would say, God gave that land to Israel. And they believe that Israel, even though the Bible doesn't say that, as I said, there's four other uses that are not a modern state. They said that is a future state that will be restored in our time. So that they interpret all these verses in the Bible and even the Gospels, and Jesus kind of becomes secondary in a way. The gospel becomes secondary to this greater movement toward the fulfillment of prophecy. And what they say is in the latter days, Israel will be restored to the land. So when Israel conquered the West Bank in 67, leaders of some of the evangelical journals said, we are in the last days and the countdown to the return of Jesus. So they looked at their Bible and they read it according to this interpretation. And then now they're saying we are getting even closer where things are so evil, we're moving toward a battle of Armageddon, the rise of the Antichrist. So they always try to figure out who the Antichrist is. When I was a kid, it was the Pope. Now
Why,
it's militant Islam.
why was it the Pope? Why is it militant Islam today? Why was it the
They,
Pope? Why?
in those days, there wasn't this understanding that Catholics were Christians like us, and that they thought the Pope would get in power and have a world empire, and that would be a forerunner of the Antichrist. It's crazy. Then it was the Soviet Union. And then you remember when Gorbachev was the president, he had a birthmark in his forehead. And they
Yes,
said,
yes.
that's the mark of the beast.
I had forgotten about that.
This is how crazy it is. And what a distortion of the Bible this is. Now it's militant Islam. So Israel conquering these Arab countries are preparing for the final battle. And I remember an interview, a great Israeli journalist named Gershon Gorenberg. He wrote a book called The End of Days. He was on 60 Minutes a few years ago. And the interviewer asked him, well, what do you think about all this help you're getting from these Christians who believe there will be a final battle? These people support Israel, right or wrong. Aren't you excited about the support you're getting in Congress? He said, look, these people believe in a 3-act drama. In Act 1, you have all these battles. In Act 2, there's a final battle of Armageddon. 2/3 of us Jews die according to the Bible, the way they read it. And in Act 3, Jesus comes back and Jews are given the choice, convert to Christianity or go to hell. He said, as a Jew, I don't like my chances. So I think that summarized what this is. This is a false theology. I have even written, I call it a heresy.
Mm.
It's a misunderstanding of Scripture. It puts Jesus and the gospel second. That's why I titled my memoir, Glory to God in the Lowest.
Mm-hmm.
We are called to the poor, to the victims of injustice. Jesus always went to the margins. He went to the poor, the prostitutes, the scribes, the Pharisees, even his enemies, and said, love your enemy. And then that Matthew 25, when I was hungry, did you bring me? That is like a parable of what we are supposed to be doing. We will be judged on how we love even our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
They miss that whole dimension.
Do we need to be aware of the authors of the different Bibles? I mean, there are so many, right? And I don't think that many people are aware that the Schofield Bible is actually a rewriting of
Yeah.
Scripture.
Yeah.
And that's why, but I grew up with a father who's not only a preacher, but like you, he's a seminarian.
Yeah.
So you all are studied in the science of theology. And my father's very, very, and I was raised by people like you who are very, very, very specific because you went through school, know,
Yeah.
To understand scripture and I just sat around the table and I heard so many debates, with people like you and Reverend James Bevel and Reverend White T. Walker and Rabbi Heschel and people like that, and I feel very privileged.
Oh,
And
you
so,
are.
well, it's a blessing because I'm trying to figure out, when I pick up Bibles and I've got so many, it makes me very cautious about that which I'm reading. Because I've spoken to so many people, Reverend Dr. Wagner, who adhere to Reverend Hagee's school of thought.
Yeah.
I mean, they have really burrowed very deeply in the American Christian Church, and it's very, very hard to get through. And I've when you speak to Jewish Zionists, because there are Christian Zionists, uh, it's like what is missed is that so many of them, it's like, wait a minute, Christian Zionism calls, most of you won't make it. Do you not get that? And And you ask it as you put that forth as gently as you can, Reverend Dr. Wagner, but no one seems to listen to that.
No, it's a very hard sell, and I have members of my family who buy into that. You know, the Schofield Bible uses the King James text,
Mhm.
and that in itself is fine. But the problem is they put an outline over it and have textual notes all through the Bible that add this Christian Zionist narrative, this Armageddon end time theology. And another part of that theology where it goes off the rails is it turns Jesus into a military warrior.
Mhm.
You know, there is a series of books called the Left Behind series,
Yes.
12 volumes, that was all based on this distorted theology of Christian Zionism. It's called premillennial dispensationalism for a fancy word. Um, and Jesus becomes a warrior at the end. He defeats the Antichrist as a warrior who uses modern technology to basically fry the Antichrist, and all their troops are eviscerated. So Jesus is an aggressive warrior. That is the opposite of the Jesus we know,
Mhm.
how the Gospels portray him as a
Is
nonviolent crusader for justice, love, and salvation.
is this the basis of our militarism? That Jesus?
Well, it's part of it. I think a lot of those in our government and uh, average citizens who support um, an aggressive theology or war are of that ilk. But, you know, it's not just them. I remember the Vietnam War when I came to political consciousness, and it was a mixture of religious and secular people who believe things like the domino theory, that if we don't defeat the enemy, if we don't stop communism in Southeast Asia, it's going to creep over and eventually take us over. You know, it's a fear-based idea that can be whether can be secular or religious. But I'll tell you, in our Congress right now, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is a hardcore Christian Zionist who supports Israel, supports every war. And you realize Biden, who was not of this
Mhm.
kind of theology, a Catholic, some call a liberal, he was sending Israel billions of dollars, bypassing Congress to keep the genocide going. So it isn't just, you know, the conservative evangelicals and I would say it's fundamentalists, a
Mhm.
subset of evangelical.
But he was a self-described Zionist as a Catholic.
Absolutely.
How can that
It's
be?
a different theology.
Okay.
After the Holocaust, there is a movement in the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church that I fell under for a while, that because of the Holocaust, we must support Israel, right or wrong, because they have suffered so much. And if you don't, then you're becoming anti Semitic. So it's a different line of thinking, a different theology. So it's because uh, they are God's people, according to the theology, which is true, but they equate the modern state as the answer to the Holocaust, which in a way it is. But when you don't have any guardrails, when you stop applying international law, when you allow them to murder, transfer, and expel Palestinians, you know, they have not been true to their calling as a Jewish people. And thank God now we have Jewish movements. Young Jews are not buying this anymore.
Mhm. What moved you away from Christian Zionism? I mean, can you help us with your evolution?
Sure. Um, I was an avid reader of the Schofield Bible, as I said. And I remember when I was around 13 or 14, I began to question this whole idea. It doesn't quite match up with Jesus and the Gospels. And I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I went to a youth evangelistic forum where an evangelist was speaking, and he finished speaking. And it was the same thing. Israel has now risen as a state. We're in the last days. Come to Jesus, convert. Uh, and if you don't, you might be carried away in the rapture. You might miss the rapture and be left behind. So it's all that fear based theology. And I was having questions. So I raised a question about that. I said, where is the love?
Mm.
This is not the Jesus that I read in the Gospels. I stood up and there were, maybe 1,000 people, youth my age. He said, son, just believe the Bible as it's written. Stop questioning it. Listen to your elders and obey. He kind of humiliated me. That was it for me. He had no answer. So I pulled away from that form of Christian Zionism, then went off to seminary, got politicized, got involved in the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, but I adopted this theology that Biden believed. Reinhold Niebuhr was one of the great theologians of the day. And he said, we as Christians must support Israel as the buffer against anti-Semitism in the world. And he created a lobby that helped Israel come into being. And it was a liberal, progressive theology, what we call a post-Holocaust theology that was built on fighting anti-Semitism wherever it is, and honoring Israel is the answer. So we must support Israel militarily, politically, theologically. It had nothing to do with the end times. It had everything to do with after the Holocaust. So I believe that. And then I moved to First Presbyterian. My first church out of seminary was a black church,
Wow.
Newark, New Jersey. I served under Joe Roberts, who was a great leader, went on to pastor the Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta. And in that congregation, it was right after the Newark riots I arrived, and they took me on as a white guy to kind of show a beautiful, and I loved that congregation. And they cared for me and nurtured me through my white supremacy and my racism, and they were very healing. But we twinned with a synagogue because there had been riots in Newark, and a lot of the store owners were Jewish. So there's a bit of anti-Semitism there. So I also got that liberal Zionism in that, because the rabbi would preach, we need you Christians to stand with us politically, give money, because Israel is the answer to the Holocaust. And then when I moved to Evanston to First Presbyterian, my first assignment was a meeting of lay people. And we said, well, what can we do to create a course that would be relevant? We got to revive our committees. They were kind of dwindling. And so someone said, let's have a study. This was 1974. Let's do a study on the Middle East conflict. And for a change, as a church, let's foreground the Palestinian issue, because we never touched that. Here, I was a pro-Israel Zionist, and I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." The guy made me nervous. We at least have to have it balanced, equal, 50-50. That's what I call the myth of balance. It is not a balanced conflict. One side holds all the cards. The strongest military, they have nuclear power, they have the empire behind them, that's Israel. And I brought in the Israeli Consul General for the first session. I was pleased. He said, "We need you Christians because here poor little Israel is fighting a battle on behalf of civilization. You need to stand with us." I was very pleased. The other guy brought in a professor who was a chair of political science, Ibrahim Abalugod, who's a Palestinian at Northwestern University. He had been driven out of his home in 1948 in the catastrophe, the first Nakba, when Israel was created and then took a significant portion of Palestinian land and created. They drove out 750,000 Palestinians. He was one. I had never really heard that story.
Hmm.
It scrambled my narrative. I began to question, and just over time, I eventually went to Beirut, then to Palestine, saw with my own eyes what was going on, totally changed my life.
How did that change your relationship with your congregation and
Ah,
with the broader community?
very perceptive question. Many were interested because I couldn't contain myself when I came back. You know, it was like a new convert.
Mhm.
I was talking about it, and I was in the worship service the first Sunday back, and I hadn't planned this. I kind of did the pastoral prayer that morning, and I kind of had a little outline, but something moved me that wasn't on my outline. I prayed for the Palestinians,
Mm.
for their suffering in their refugee camps. And after the service, one of the elders came up to me and said, "I'm going to call a meeting to censor you. You cannot do that. You're politicizing worship." In the black church, there's no problem.
Mhm.
You know, I we had dialogues with the Black Panthers. We dealt with all kinds of stuff, and it could be political because justice is one. It can't be e- erased from the gospel. So anyway, and then a pastor, a conservative fellow who was on the staff said, I really am offended by what you did." I said, "Well, let's have lunch. Let's meet. I want you to hear what I've experienced." He said, "No, I'm not interested." So he did organize a committee to censure me. And I never gave a pastoral prayer in that church again.
So that stance pushed pushed you in your church.
Yeah. I had many who did support me. Uh, and, I didn't make this my only theme song, but I was uh, trying to get people interested. But about 2 years later, I left the church. I tried to find ways to deal with this, and felt that God was calling me to something different. And yeah, I went and I became the director of a group that kind of died called the Palestine Human Rights Campaign,
Mhm.
and we revived it.
Well, it's interesting. If I could go back to your experience in Newark for a minute, because I think that's fascinating. Because um, having known Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, and others who stood up for Palestinian rights, 60 years ago.
Yeah,
Um, I'm wondering if some have accused blacks of being anti-Semitic, and I said, and it's been my observation that black people uh, don't take umbrage with Jewish people on religious grounds. It's the racism that comes with
that's
the
right.
American experience. It's not the religion; it's the racism. So it's not anti-Semitism. It's you pushing back against whiteness.
Yeah,
Um, is that your observation?
yeah, pretty much. And I think, back in the civil rights era, the Jews really stepped up. They
Mhm.
were very involved in the civil rights, and this was Rabbi Heschel. You
Yes.
probably met. He was
Yes.
the leading theologian. marched with MLK, Martin Luther King, uh, and they were very close.
Mhm.
Some of the early freedom riders, some paid with their life. They were Jewish.
Mhm.
So Jews were really together. And I think, that many of the Jewish leaders wanted to keep that going. And, but when it came to Palestinians,
Mhm.
there was always that kind of, I think, fear in many of the Jewish leaders that they might turn against Israel.
Mhm.
So anyway, but look at somebody like Ta Coates today,
Mhm.
who has really come out, went to Palestine, wrote about it, and has come under significant fire by some in the Jewish community. I would say the hardline Zionists.
Mhm.
You always have to separate Zionism from Judaism,
Oh, sure, of course.
and that is a really key thing. But he has been embraced by Jewish Voice for Peace and the
Mhm.
progressives, and I think right now, um, as I said earlier, young Jews under 40 just are not buying Zionism. Not
Oh,
only they're embarrassed, they're marching in the streets. They are ahead of everyone else in terms of really paying a price to stop this genocide. And thank God for them.
why do you think that is? I mean, because they're way out there in this fight. I mean, do you think that they sense, from what I can see, a growing anti-Jewish um, sensibility in the culture? And I have to separate that from people who are pushing back against Zionism,
Yeah,
because in some ways, it helped me with this, Pastor, is we have characterized this as a religious fight, but is it a religious fight or a political one in
yeah.
Palestine, or is it
It
both?
is it is primarily a political one,
Mhm.
75%.
Yeah, with
And
a.
it needs a political solution.
Mhm.
That's why it's political. This genocide will not end until there's a political solution for Palestine. You know,
Mhm.
it has to be that. But at the same time, uh, so many young Jews, and now it's spreading into the older ones, are finding that the major institutions like the Anti Defamation League, the Jewish federations, are behind Netanyahu
Mhm.
100%. And if you even criticize, this is the basis of what the censorship of Harvard, Columbia, and all the rest are. I mean, if you criticize Israel, if you hold a protest, now you're going to be censured, not only censured, you may not graduate, you could be expelled from school, etc., etc. So there's this counter move. But I think the anti-Zionist move is will not be stopped because I think these young Jews, and now there's a synagogue in Chicago that
Yeah.
is anti-Zionist, Rabbi Rosen,
Yes.
and they, with Jewish Voice for People, are leading a whole new vanguard to recover our values as Jews. That Netanyahu is a disgrace, and he is distorting, and he's creating a dangerous situation for Jews where there will be more anti-Semitism, and real anti-Semitism, and there
Mhm.
is.
Well, these are the people who I saw when my parents went to Lebanon and toured Gaza and the West Bank, what, in 79?
Yeah,
And that was the real opposition to Reverend's presidential campaigns. Some people don't want to talk about that now
yeah,
because, the campaigns are iconic and all of that. And we had progressive Jewish people who were 10 toes down in the campaign, who came when, at the beginning of the campaign, there was nothing. I mean, like, no money, that.
yeah.
But they just get, I can name them. And it was a joy to see them sitting alongside the Jim Zogby's, the
Hmm.
Carolyn Casdens, and all of and that group. So you can't lump Jeff Jeff Cohen and Norman Solomon, who were tracking the bias in the campaign that we were up against. But in 1981, when I was interviewed for Harvard, the pushback was on my parents' politics
Oh my
on,
gosh.
on that, and it was an ugly interview, and I had to be re-interviewed.
Oh,
And they said,
wow.
we had to fight to get her through committee. Now, mind you, I was a merit scholar, and they had reached out to me.
Mm,
But the rub was my father's politics, and they said, we want to know if you're going to be independent of your father and his politics,
wow.
i.e., will you throw him under the bus? I was like, no. I said,
Yeah.
was Caroline Kennedy asked this question? I know she just came out of where. I mean, but that was all I could do because as a
Yeah.
17-year-old, I can't be disrespectful. And
Wow.
they said, well, your father's no president. I said, he's not a killer. He's a freedom fighter.
Right.
Presidents kill people.
Yeah.
People in my father's lane don't do that. And I mean, when I got home and told my parents, my mother knew that was coming. She didn't want me to go on the interview by myself.
Wow. She anticipated it.
Well, because of the firestorm of, I mean, we had constant death threats, more than normal.
Mm,
Lost support, a ton of it, but it was the support that Push had was from my father's speaking engagements and was from the Black church. So
yeah.
we didn't take the hits that other Black organizations would take. We took them,
Mm,
but my parents just kept powering through. And I'm saying all of that to say, because I think it's interesting to see in the Presbyterian church, in such a prominent congregation, the pushback and the push away.
yeah.
And I want to know, I mean, I only have about 7 or 8 minutes left here, but I want you to have them just because that's still a very real thing when you look at the news, because you don't really hear the Palestinian perspective.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
don't hear you.
And that's not by accident.
Mm.
I mean, there. I mean, the New York Times. It was exposed that they were journalists. In the New York Times were instructed you cannot use the word genocide,
Mhm.
even though that's what's going on, and you have to be soft in terms of how you describe the Palestinian conflict. Always start your narrative by focusing on October 7th and Hamas. Then you don't have the context of why October 7th happened, but that's what they're told to do. Now that's changing because it's been revealed, but our media is doesn't help us. That Palestine is still a dangerous thing to deal with. But thank God today we have social media like your program. No, the Zionist pressure cannot contain all of this. And it's not just the Zionist pressure, it's kind of, you know, right wing politics,
Mm.
Christian supremacy uh, that's containing it. A lot of the radio and TV are under Sinclair Broadcasting, which is extremely right wing. So it's not just Zionism that's doing this. But let me go back to First Presbyterian Church. Um, that was early when this happened to me.
Mhm.
Now that church is twinned with the Palestinian Christian Church and ministry in Bethlehem. They are different. Gradually, I was kind of way ahead my time in a sense, and maybe I didn't handle everything well. But now they have come along and are twinned with a Lutheran congregation that is with Mitri Raheb, a theologian,
Mhm.
that is doing tremendous work in the whole Bethlehem area. So there's been a big change at that church. So across time, things heal. And the Presbyterian denomination uh, has worked very, very hard to embrace things like BDS, that is a legitimate expression of nonviolent moral resistance to boycott the products of a country where they're at war and killing people. And I used to defend uh, this. We would have debates at our National Assembly, and I remember saying, I receive a pension. I do not want my pension be invested in companies that are providing bulldozers, destroying homes, and killing people. So that's why, if I believe in Jesus, I have to have a complete ethic. And so, therefore, I support boycotts and divestment as a nonviolent way to tell the truth and resist evil. So,
Reverend Dr. Wagner, before we go, and I have to ask you if you can come back on the show very, very soon,
oh, absolutely.
because I've got to, just before we go, I I wonder where you see us as a nation, in particular, the United States, morally. This is something I ponder. I discuss with my parents often,
Yeah.
because they're carrying the conversations over that we've heard all of our lives. Indeed, the mission statement of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend Shuttlesworth and Reverend Abernathy and others founded, is to save the soul of America.
Yeah.
This is a spiritual mission, and that is, we're people united to serve humanity. I mean, it's a spiritual cleansing and mission. Where do you see us as a nation today?
No. We're in deep trouble. I think the empire is in decline. We are the empire. And, the great historians say great empires usually decline from within,
Mm-hmm.
ravel from within because of well, we can see it with the current president and this administration that are weaponizing racism, weaponizing anti-immigrant ideas, censoring our leading universities, and it's a playbook for totalitarianism. I keep rereading Hannah Arendt's The
Mm-hmm.
Origins of Totalitarianism, and the Trump administration is following a lot of that. You know, sending the police like brown shirts into the streets of Washington and LA. And, it's, and then the big, beautiful bill, which benefits the wealthy. And then the tariffs that are all going to fall upon the rest of us. We are moving, to an oligarchy or plutocracy where a few
Mm-hmm.
are in power, but the rest of us, especially the poor, are going to pay a heavy, heavy price. But one thing this does is it awakens a minority movement to resist all this. And as a Christian, I think, and working with progressive Jews, Muslims, Hindus, secular people across the board, we are in an awakening to resist, and we may have to pay heavier prices in going to the streets, in our writings, and taking stands. But I think the next election is going to tell us a lot. We can organize well enough, fine. And my wife and I are trying to help like some young politicians. There's a couple Palestinians we're trying to help to get into office. You know, starting at the very bottom, locally at school boards, but other things. Um, Cook County representative in a state board, and so on, to get into office, but people with good moral, but with courage that want to fight the fight. So it's happening on both sides. The decay is coming top down, uh, but there's also God will always have a moral resistance, and we have to be part of that. And it's usually a minority.
Mm-hmm. It's
Well,
what you say, Dr. King. He did not march in clumps. Most of the marches were small.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and and these movements are small. You're right, but it's that enlightened minority
yeah.
who change things. I give the final word to you. What would you like to know? What has There's a lot that's unsaid, but I have to have you back. What would
Oh,
you like people to hear?
I'll be back. I'll be happy to come back. Always separate Zionism from Judaism. Always be careful. Um, do your homework, study the Bible, but use all the tools to critique, uh, this Christian nationalism and the Zionism that many are advocating in the Bible. And do your part, whether it's in your church, your local community, whatever, to stand up for justice. I remember the quote of Dr. King: the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. And at first, I used to think God is in charge, God will make it happen. Now I believe we have to be the ones that bend that arc, that God needs partnership to get the work done. And this is where the minority will rise up, and we need to be part of that with our Congress, with our local politics, with our families, with our churches, and so on. So keep hope alive.
And get the
Where
book.
can we hear that?
No, look, I tell you, and I
That's
want you to know,
your father, yes, who I
absolutely.
voted for.
Well, but you all are men of God, men of the clergy, and I thank God for you for taking what you have learned from the ministry of Jesus into the
Yes,
world, just as Jesus did. And I thank
amen.
you for it.
Center Jesus, his life, his teachings is needed more than ever.
Get the book, Anxious for Armageddon. Anxious for Armageddon, everybody. You have got to read it, and you've got to read Glory to God in the Lowest, Journeys in the Unholy Land. These books are worth your while, and I thank God for them because we definitely need them. We need them, and we need you and your wisdom now more than ever. My love to your wife, and my love to you. Thank you
And
for
back
sharing
to you.
with me.
Thank you so much for all you're doing. God bless.
God bless you.
We'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. The Santita Jackson Show here, everybody. AM 950 Radio. Like and share, like and share. I hope that you got something really, really good from this conversation today with this great man of God, Reverend Dr. Don Wagner. Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Hey, everybody. Coming up in at the top of the hour, we're going to be talking uh, with with David Swanson about this Trump Zelensky summit today, along with the European leaders, and is peace possible? And at 12, we're going to be talking with Bryce Green about really how we got here in Ukraine, what Ukraine is about. Let's do that. And then at 1 o'clock, we're going to talk about what's happening in Washington. A good many young people are very, very, very concerned now. They said that ICE and the FBI uh, and the federalized police and the National Guard on the streets of DC have made them very anxious. They don't feel good about this. We're going to talk about that. What are their rights? What are your rights? As the president talks about moving this into Baltimore and to Oakland and Chicago and other cities. We'll be talking about that today. I'm going back to back to back to back. So stay tuned, but come back at the top of the hour. Love you.